Hello everyone. In this class, I am going to teach you about GST set of rules. In the last class, I have explained you about input tax credit. Here, again I will explain you about input tax credit. See, when you purchase the goods from the supplier, you pay tax on purchases. When you purchase the goods from the supplier, you pay the tax on purchases. Means purchase value that is inclusive of GST. It is called as input GST. When you purchase the goods from the supplier, you pay tax on purchases. That is called as input GST. And in the case of sale of goods and services to the customers, business collect the tax from the customer. That is called as output GST. But here, such collected tax does not belong to the business. And business has to pay such tax to the government. Here, so instead of paying the GST, means output GST, to the government in full, you can subtract the input GST already paid from the output GST. This is called as input tax credit. That is nothing but input tax credit that is equals to output GST. So, here I will write down input tax credit that is equals to output GST means collected on sales. Collected on sales minus input GST that is paid on purchases. Paid on purchases. This is called as input tax credit. So now we will see the GST set of rules, means how we have to utilize this input tax credit between IGST, CGST and SGST. Now we will see the rules. So in that first one, IGST ITC means input tax credit is utilized first against IGST liability. So here IGST input tax credit we need to utilize first against IGST liability and then against CGST and SGST. Okay. So IGST input tax credit we need to be utilized first against IGST liability only. After that we need to utilize remaining IGST input tax credit to the CGST and SGST. And second rule, that is CGST input tax credit can be used only against CGST and IGST liabilities. Means here CGST input tax credit it can be used only against CGST, means first utilized against CGST first and after that IGST liabilities. And this CGST input tax credit it cannot be utilized against SGST liability, only CGST and IGST. And next third one, SGST input tax credit can be used only against SGST. First we need to be utilized against SGST and IGST liabilities and not utilized against CGST liabilities. Here IGST it can be utilized against IGST, CGST and SGST, but CGST ITC cannot be utilized against SGST and SGST input tax credit that is not utilized against CGST. Okay, I hope this concept is clear to you all. Now we will see these rules through one example. Here, GST liabilities means what? That is the output GST collected on sales. Collected on sales. that is output IGST is 5000 rupees and output CGST rupees 2000 and output SGST that is rupees 2000. Now available input tax credit, it means what? Input GST that is paid on purchases. Input IGST 6000, input CGST 3000, input SGST is rupees 3000. See here, available input tax credit means here in this problem you have already paid the tax on purchases. You have already paid the tax on purchases. But when you sell the goods and services to the customer, you will collect the tax from the customers and that is not belong to you. And you have to pay such tax to the government. But during purchases here, you have already paid the tax. So, here instead of paying the full tax that is collected on sale, you can subtract the input GST that is already paid from the output GST. Okay, so remaining balance of tax we need to pay to the government. Here you need not to pay the full tax to the government, only the balance, net balance that goes to the government, because on purchases you have already paid the tax. You need not to pay the tax to the government twice. Okay, this is about input tax credit. Now we will solve the problem. First one, IGST, CGST and SGST. Okay. First, what is input tax credit? It means output GST minus input GST. So, output GST that is rupees 5000, will write the rupees symbol here. CGST is rupees 2000 and SGST is rupees 2000. Fine, that is output GST. Now we have to set off one by one. First we will go to the IGST. So less input GST or input tax credit. So here, see here, input, so integrated IGST input tax credit is utilized first against IGST liability and then against CGST and SGST. See here, input IGST is, that is rupees 6000. See, now we will write down rupees 6000. It means what? See here, you have already paid rupees 6000 when on purchases. On purchases you have already paid the tax of rupees 6000. But when you are making the sale of goods and services to the customers, you have collected the tax that is rupees 5000. But you have already paid rupees 6000 tax. Okay, now you need not to pay any tax to the government. Why? Because here you have already paid, that is rupees 6000, that is more than rupees 5000. Fine, so remaining rupees 1000, that is the remaining input IGST. See here again I will explain you. Rupees 6000 tax that is paid on purchases, and that is rupees 5000, that is the tax collected on sales. Means here you have on purchases you have already paid the tax. means this collected tax on sales of rupees 5,000 you need not to pay to the government because you have already paid the tax of rupees 6,000. Here 6,000 rupees, that is more than rupees 5,000. So our remaining input IGST, that is rupees 1,000. And this input IGST means input tax credit we can utilize against CGST and SGST. Fine. Now we will utilize this less input IGST against CGST. Here 1,000 and 1,000. Here nil and rupees 1,000 amount and only rupees 1,000. Okay, we have to utilize it again CGST, that is rupees 1,000 means rupees here, see here 2,000 rupees that is collected on sales and input IGST is that is rupees 1,000 means net balance that is rupees 1,000 we need to pay to the government. We need to pay to the government. Okay, see here 2,000 only, that is SGST. Now we have to, this is, here we have utilized full amount of input IGST. Input IGST. See here we have fully utilized it. First against rupees 5,000 and against IGST and remaining 1,000 against CGST. Now there is no input IGST is available with us and CGST remaining output GST that is rupees 1,000. Remaining output CGST that is rupees 1,000. Now we will have to check whether there is any input CGST. See here there is input CGST of rupees 3,000. Now we have to utilize this amount of input CGST to set off against CGST, that is rupees 3,000. So less input CGST or input tax credit of rupees 3,000. Here rupees 2,000. See here we have paid on purchases that is rupees 3,000 and output GST CGST that is rupees 1,000. Here also remaining input CGST that is rupees 2,000. Here also we need not to pay to the tax to the government because we have utilized the credit. We have utilized the input CGST that is paid on purchases and remaining amount of input tax credit that is rupees 2,000. Now question will arise whether this remaining amount of input tax credit is utilized against CGST? No. So CGST input tax credit it can be used only against CGST and IGST. Okay, now we will see the next one, that is rupees. Now we have to set off the SGST, that is less. This is the remaining input CGST. Less input SGST, less input SGST, that is rupees 3,000. Input SGST is rupees 3,000 that is paid on purchases, but now we have to pay to the government that is amount of rupees 2,000. But here we have already paid the amount of rupees 3000. So here also we need not to pay the tax to the government. So rupees 1000, that is the remaining SGST, and rupees 2000, that is the remaining CGST. So rupees 2000 and 1000, this is treated as an asset under the balance sheet. This is treated as here. You are not able to see. 1 minute. See there. See this rupees 2000 and 1000, that is treated as an asset under balance sheet. See again, I will explain this example. See here, GST liabilities and available input tax credit. Here first one we need to write output GST, that is rupees 5000, 2000 and 2000. Now we will use input, first input IGST we have to utilize against first IGST and afterwards CGST and SGST. So the input IGST means input tax credit available, that is rupees 6000, that is paid on purchases, and output GST, that is collected on sales, that is rupees 5000. Means here we need not to pay any tax to the government because we have already paid the amount of rupees 6000 on purchases, that is more than output GST. So remaining input tax credit under IGST, that is rupees 1000. Here we can utilize this remaining input IGST against CGST and SGST. Now see the output CGST, that is rupees 2000. Here we can utilize this remaining input IGST of rupees 1000. So 1000 and our output CGST is rupees 2000. Means net payment of CGST to the government, that is rupees 1000. Before that, before the payment of tax to the government, we have to check whether there is any input CGST is available with us. See, in the problem they have given the available input CGST, that is rupees 3000. Means here we need to utilize this input CGST against output CGST. Means here we have already paid the amount of rupees 3000 and we need not to pay any tax to the government because we have paid the tax on purchases, that is rupees 3000, that is more than output GST. So remaining input CGST, that is rupees 2000, and this remaining input CGST income tax input tax credit we should not utilize against SGST. So it becomes the asset under the balance sheet. Now we will see the SGST. Output SGST, that is rupees 2000, and input SGST means input tax credit available, that is rupees 3000. So we need to set off against output SGST, that is rupees 3000. Means we have already paid rupees 3000 on purchases, that is rupees 3000, that is more than rupees 2000. So we need not to pay any tax to the government. So remaining input SGST, that is rupees 1000, and remaining input CGST, that is rupees 2000. So rupees 3000, it is treated as an asset under the balance sheet. So in this example we need not to pay any tax to the government because we have already paid the full taxes on purchases. Here we have utilized these input tax credit against output GST. Means here the input tax credit available input IGST, CGST, SGST means that is paid on the purchases, that is more than the GST that is collected on sales. We need not to pay the tax to the government twice. Fine, this is about GST set of rules. I hope this concept is clear to you all. If not, please leave a comment. Thank you.